The air in my grandfather's study was thick with the scent of old leather, expensive whiskey, and unspoken ultimatums. It was a room where fortunes were decided and futures were forged, and today, mine was on the anvil. Arthur Vance, my grandfather, sat behind a desk the size of a small boat, his face a mask of patriarchal authority. Across from me, flanking the fireplace, stood the Johnson brothers. Caleb Johnson, the sun around which my world had orbulated for as long as I could remember, leaned casually against the mantelpiece. His golden hair caught the light, his easy smile was firmly in place, and his blue eyes, the same shade as a summer sky, held a familiar, possessive confidence. He was everything a girl was supposed to dream of, charming, popular, the heir to the Johnson shipping empire. He was the boy I had loved with a terrifying, all-consuming passion. And then there was Ethan. Ethan Johnson stood straighter, a silent pillar in the shadow of his brother's brilliance. He was taller than Caleb, with hair the color of dark earth and eyes that were a deep, thoughtful gray. Where Caleb was a brilliant flame, Ethan was a steady, grounding stone. He was quiet, observant, and perpetually overlooked, most of all by me. His expression was unreadable, a stark contrast to Caleb's open, almost smug, anticipation. "Elara," my grandfather's voice boomed, cutting through my thoughts. "You know the situation. The Vance and Johnson families have been allies for a century. It is time to formalize that bond with a union. For the sake of our legacy." He gestured with a liver-spotted hand towards the two men. "Both are fine young men. Both are willing. The choice is yours." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of past and present. Everyone in this room, everyone in our rarefied social circle, knew the answer. They were waiting for the inevitable. They were waiting for me to say Caleb's name. My mind flashed back 4 years, to my 18th birthday. I was a wisp of a girl then, all sharp angles and feverish devotion. When my grandfather had first rejected my pleas to be betrothed to Caleb, citing my youth, I had spiraled. I refused to eat, my body wasting away until I was nothing but bone and desperation. I contracted pneumonia, and in my delirium, I did nothing but whisper his name. Caleb, Caleb, Caleb. Doctors had spoken in hushed tones, telling my grandfather my will to live was tied to this one boy. I had weaponized my own life, begging to marry him. My grandfather had relented then, promising to arrange it when the time was right. Now the time was right. Caleb's smile widened. He pushed off the mantelpiece, taking a small step forward, ready to claim his prize. He thought this was his victory, the final capitulation of the girl who had been his devoted shadow since we were children, trailing behind him, fetching him things, her heart in her eyes for all to see. He had always treated my affection like a comfortable old coat, something he could put on when he felt a chill and discard when the sun came out. He never truly saw me, he only saw my adoration. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time without the blinding filter of infatuation. I saw the easy arrogance, the assumption that I was his for the taking. I saw a man who had never had to work for anything, especially not affection. He was beautiful, yes, but he was a shallow sea, sparkling on the surface, but with no hidden depths. My childhood love for him felt like a fever dream now, a sickness I had finally recovered from. That illness 4 years ago hadn't just been a plea, it had been a purge. It had burned the obsession out of me, leaving behind an empty space that had slowly, quietly, filled with self-respect. My gaze drifted from Caleb to his brother. Ethan had not moved. His gray eyes were fixed on me, but there was no expectation in them. There was only a quiet, unnerving stillness. He watched me as one might watch a cornered animal, with a mixture of caution and something that looked surprisingly like empathy. He had been there during my illness, a silent presence in the background of hospital rooms. While Caleb had made a few showy visits with flowers, looking uncomfortable and eager to leave, Ethan had been the one who once sat quietly in a corner, reading a book, for 3 hours, simply because my grandmother had asked him to make sure I wasn't alone. I hadn't thought anything of it then. I barely registered his existence. But I registered it now. I saw the quiet strength in his posture, the intelligence in his gaze. I saw a man who didn't demand the spotlight, who seemed perfectly content to exist in his own space. He wasn't the sun. He was the cool, quiet earth. Solid. Dependable. Real. Chasing the sun had almost burned me alive. Perhaps it was time to plant my feet on solid ground. A slow, deliberate breath filled my lungs. The decision, which had seemed so impossible a moment ago, now felt like the only sane choice I could make. It was a choice not for the girl I was, but for the woman I was trying to become. I have made my decision, grandfather, I said, my voice clearer and stronger than I expected. Caleb's smugness reached its peak. He was already turning to accept my grandfather's handshake. My grandfather leaned forward. And? I tore my eyes away from Caleb and looked directly at his brother. For the first time, I offered Ethan Johnson a piece of my attention, a piece of my will, a piece of my future. I choose Ethan. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than the leather, more potent than the whiskey. It was a deafening void where an entire history of expectation had just collapsed. I saw Caleb freeze mid-step, his smile dissolving into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His blue eyes, once so confident, were now wide with disbelief. It was as if the earth had suddenly started spinning in the opposite direction. My grandfather's eyebrows shot up into his hairline, but a slow, calculating smile began to form on his lips. He looked from me to his chosen grandson-in-law. But my focus was on Ethan. His stoic mask had finally cracked. Just for a second, his gray eyes widened, showing a flicker of astonishment that mirrored his brother's. But unlike Caleb's, it was quickly replaced by a deep, searching curiosity. His gaze locked with mine, and in that moment, 1,000 questions were asked and none were answered. He was no longer just Caleb's brother. He was my fiancé. And he had no idea why. Neither, I realized with a jolt, did I. Not entirely. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had just saved myself. From what? I wasn't yet sure. But the first step had been taken. Away from the sun, and into the earth's steady, quiet embrace. The drive back to the Vance estate was a mausoleum on wheels. The silence from my grandfather wasn't disapproving, it was contemplative, the silence of a chess master who had just watched his opponent make a surprisingly brilliant move. He glanced at me once, a single, sharp appraisal, before turning his gaze back to the road. He had given me a choice, and I had chosen. The matter, for him, was closed. For me, it was just beginning. The fallout began the moment I stepped into the grand foyer. The news, it seemed, had traveled faster than our car. My mother rushed towards me, her face a canvas of frantic confusion. "Elara, what have you done?" Caleb called. He was incoherent. "He said you chose Ethan? Is this some kind of joke?" "It's not a joke, Mother," I said, my voice steady as I unpinned my hat. "Grandfather offered me a choice. I made it." "But, why?" Her voice was a high-pitched whine. "All those years. The doctors, the pleading. We almost lost you over Caleb. Everyone knows you love him. Everyone knows the story of a foolish girl," I corrected, my tone sharper than intended. "That girl grew up." Before she could press further, the person I was dreading, and perversely, anticipating, the most appeared at the top of the grand staircase. Caleb. He descended the stairs not with his usual easy grace, but with the heavy, thunderous steps of a dethroned king. He stopped a few feet from me, his handsome face twisted into an ugly knot of bewilderment and rage. "A joke. That's what this is. You're trying to make me jealous, Elara. Trying to get my attention. Fine. You have it. Now, stop this foolishness and tell your grandfather you made a mistake." It was astonishing. The sheer, unmitigated arrogance of it. Even now, he couldn't conceive of a world where he wasn't the center. My choice had to be about him, a tactic, a game. The idea that it had nothing to do with him at all was beyond his comprehension. "There was no mistake, Caleb," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. I chose Ethan. The engagement will be announced tomorrow. Why? He demanded, his voice cracking. He stepped closer, invading my space, his familiar scent of sandalwood and citrus filling the air. It was a scent that used to make my knees weak. Now, it just smelled like the past. After everything? After I watched you nearly die for me? You begged for me. You told me your life was meaningless without me. His words were meant to be daggers of guilt, but they landed like feathers. I was a child, Caleb. A child who confused a crush with the center of the universe. I'm sorry if my growing up inconveniences you. His jaw worked, the muscle ticking in his cheek. For the first time in his life, he was utterly powerless against me, and he didn't know how to handle it. He was looking at me, but he was still seeing the ghost of the girl who adored him. He couldn't see the woman in front of him who was tired of being a reflection. He left, storming out of the house, and I was left with the trembling silence of my mother and the heavy weight of what was to come. Later that evening, a car crunched on the gravel driveway. It wasn't Caleb returning. It was Ethan. He was shown into the library, where I was waiting, nursing a cup of tea I didn't want. He entered the room and closed the doors behind him, creating an island of silence in a house buzzing with scandal. He didn't speak at first. He walked over to the unlit fireplace, his posture as rigid as it had been in my grandfather's study. He was dressed in a simple dark suit, but he wore it with an understated elegance that Caleb, with all his flashy tailoring, could never quite achieve. Finally, he turned to face me, his gray eyes searching my face. There was no anger there, no ego. Just a deep, profound confusion. I think you owe me an explanation, Alara, he said, his voice a low, calm baritone. It was a voice used to being heard without having to be raised. I don't know if I have one that will satisfy you, I admitted honestly. Try me, he invited, a flicker of dry humor in his tone. Right now, I'm operating on the assumption that I am either a pawn in a game to wound my brother, or you've suffered a significant head injury. I almost smiled. His directness was a splash of cold, clean water after Caleb's histrionics. Neither, I said, setting my teacup down. I stood up, wanting to be on his level. I'm not trying to hurt Caleb. A convenient side effect, then, he countered, his gaze unwavering. He's not handling it well. He seems to be under the impression you've been abducted by aliens and replaced with a pod person. My choice had very little to do with Caleb, I insisted, though even I could hear the faint lie in that. It had everything to do with me. And, with you. He raised a skeptical eyebrow. With me? Alara, with all due respect, until this afternoon, I'm not sure you were aware I could form complete sentences. For the last 15 years, I have been, at best, a piece of furniture in the background of your life. The thing you looked past to get a better view of Caleb. His words were blunt, but they were true. They stung because of their accuracy. I had never seen him. He was just Caleb's older brother, a quiet shadow, a footnote. You're right, I conceded, my throat tight. I never gave you a second thought. And I'm sorry for that. It was my failing, not yours. But I see you now. And what is it you think you see? He asked, his voice softening slightly, becoming less confrontational and more genuinely curious. I struggled for the words. How could I explain a transformation that was still so new to me? I see someone, quiet. Someone solid. Someone who doesn't need to be the center of every room he's in. I spent my whole life chasing a bonfire, Ethan. I got burned. Badly. I'm tired of the noise and the light and the heat. I think I'm looking for stillness. For solid ground. I was being more honest with him than I had been with anyone, including myself. It was a terrifyingly vulnerable moment. I had laid a small, fragile piece of my new self at his feet, fully expecting him to crush it, to call me a liar or a fool. He was silent for a long time, his gray eyes studying me so intently it felt like he was reading the pages of my soul. He saw the feverish girl I used to be, and he saw the uncertain woman standing before him. He saw the whole, messy truth. Finally, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. Solid ground, he repeated softly, as if testing the weight of the words. That's a tall order for a man you've only just decided to notice. He took a step closer, closing the distance between us until only a few feet remained. This is an arrangement, Elara. A contract brokered by our grandfathers. But if we're going to do this, if my name is going to be tied to yours, I have one condition. What is it? I asked, my breath catching. No more shadows, he said, his gaze firm and absolute. Not yours, and not mine. I will not be a substitute for my brother, and I will not have a wife who is still living in the shadow of a childhood obsession. You chose me. If this is to work, you will have to keep choosing me. Every day. Can you do that? It was a challenge. And it was a promise. He wasn't just accepting my choice, he was defining the terms of our future. He was demanding I be present, be real, be whole. It was everything I secretly craved. Yes, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I can. A flicker of something I couldn't decipher passed through his eyes, not trust, not yet, but a willingness to begin. The announcement of our engagement sent shockwaves through our social circle. It was the topic of hushed conversations at the country club and frantic phone calls between matriarchs. The narrative was quickly spun. Poor, jilted Caleb, the golden boy, had been inexplicably cast aside by the girl whose devotion was legendary. I was painted as either cruel and manipulative or tragically unstable. Ethan, as usual, was treated as an afterthought, a curious plot twist in a story that was still, maddeningly, all about Caleb. Wedding preparations began with a clinical efficiency that both our families were known for. Planners were hired, venues were scouted, and guest lists were drawn. This forced Ethan and me into a strange, formal proximity. We met for cake tastings, where he deferred to my preference for lemon over chocolate with a quiet nod. We reviewed floral arrangements, where he pointed out that lilies, my mother's choice, were funereal and suggested freesias instead, because he'd once heard me say I liked their scent. It was in these small, mundane moments that I began to see the man I had chosen. He was observant in a way Caleb had never been. Caleb would have complimented a dress, Ethan noticed the worried frown I wore with it. Caleb would have dominated a conversation, Ethan listened, asking thoughtful questions that made me feel, for the first time, interesting. We discovered a shared, dry wit. We found common ground in our love for old, black and white films, and our disdain for overly sweet champagne. A tentative bridge was being built between us, constructed from shared glances and quiet understandings. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a sturdy foundation of respect. The first major test of this fragile new alliance came at the annual Vance Foundation Charity Gala, the first public event we would attend as an engaged couple. I chose my dress with care, a simple, elegant sheath of deep sapphire blue. It was a color that suited me, not a color I thought Caleb would like. It was a small, silent declaration. When Ethan arrived to pick me up, he stopped in the doorway, his eyes sweeping over me. He didn't offer a flowery compliment. He simply said, "That's a good color on you, Elara." He then offered me his arm, his touch firm and reassuring. The moment we entered the ballroom, 100 pairs of eyes swiveled towards us. The whispers were a physical presence, a rustling of silk and judgment. I felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach, but Ethan's hand on the small of my back was a steady, grounding pressure. "Just breathe," he murmured, his voice for my ears only. "They're just people." But one of those people was Caleb. He found us near the champagne fountain, a beautiful but vapid heiress clinging to his arm. He looked magnificent in his tuxedo, a walking, talking embodiment of privilege. But tonight, his usual easy charm was brittle, stretched thin over a core of raw resentment. "Brother," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "And Elara. You look, well." He said it as if my well-being was a personal affront. "Caleb," Ethan greeted him, his tone perfectly level. "Camilla. Isn't this something?" Caleb went on, gesturing around the room. "The talk of the town. my little brother and my biggest fan. He looked directly at me, his eyes glittering with malice. I have to admit, Alara, I never took you for being so strategic. A brilliant move. How long did you have this planned? Before I could form a response, Ethan stepped slightly in front of me, a subtle, protective gesture. That's enough, Caleb. Is it? Caleb laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. I'm just trying to understand. Remember that summer at the lake house, Alara? When you carved our initials into the old oak tree? You cried for an hour when you smudged the sea. Or what about the time you memorized my entire football schedule, including the away games? This sudden change of heart, it's a bit hard to swallow. He was trying to unnerve me, to remind me of the pathetic, lovesick girl I had been. He wanted to see me flinch, to see a flicker of the old devotion in my eyes. He was trying to prove to Ethan, and to himself, that I was still his. The old Alara would have withered under his scorn. But the old Alara was gone. I stepped out from behind Ethan, my posture straight, my chin high. I remember, Caleb, I said, my voice cold and clear. I also remember that you never bothered to learn my birthday. I remember you calling me Emily for the first 6 months we knew each other. And I remember that on the day you supposedly came to save me from carving our initials, you were actually there to meet Sarah Peters behind the boathouse. You only noticed me because you tripped over my bag. The color drained from Caleb's face. The heiress on his arm looked between us, her eyes wide. Even Ethan glanced at me, a flicker of surprise in his expression. I had never spoken to Caleb like this before. I had never dared to hold up a mirror to his self-absorption. You remember my past perfectly, Caleb, I continued, my voice low and steady. Because my past was all about you. You'll have to forgive me if my future isn't. I turned, took Ethan's arm, and said, I believe our table is ready. Without another word, we walked away, leaving Caleb standing there, for once in his life, utterly speechless. As we moved through the crowd, I could feel the change in the atmosphere. The whispers hadn't stopped, but their tone had shifted. When we reached our table, Ethan pulled out my chair. As I sat, he leaned down, his voice a warm breath against my ear. For someone who claims to be looking for stillness, he murmured, you certainly know how to cause a storm. I looked up at him, and for the first time, I saw a genuine, unguarded smile on his face. It transformed him, chasing the shadows from his serious features and revealing a warmth I never knew existed. Perhaps, I replied, a small smile playing on my own lips, I've just learned to choose my weather. In that moment, across a crowded ballroom, under the weight of 100 judgmental stares, something new sparked between us. It wasn't just respect or a truce. It was the first, tentative flicker of a genuine partnership. We were no longer just two individuals bound by a contract. We were a team. And we had just won our first battle. In the weeks that followed the charity gala, a subtle shift occurred. The wedding preparations, once a series of awkward business meetings, became a comfortable routine. Our conversations drifted from florists and caterers to books we'd read and places we'd dreamed of seeing. I learned that Ethan's quietness was not emptiness, but depth. He spoke 3 languages, had a passion for restoring antique clocks, and possessed a knowledge of maritime history that rivaled our grandfathers. Caleb, on the other hand, grew more desperate. His tactics shifted from public confrontation to a more insidious form of psychological warfare. He sent me flowers, the same white roses he'd brought to my hospital bed years ago, with a card that read, remembering when it was simple. He would accidentally run into me at my favorite cafe, regaling me with stories of our shared childhood, his voice laced with a wistful nostalgia designed to pull me back into his orbit. It was all noise. And the more noise Caleb made, the more I found myself drawn to Ethan's profound silence. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Ethan asked me to accompany him to a place he needed to visit. He didn't say where. We drove out of the city, the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers a soothing counterpoint to the storm outside. We ended up at a small, unassuming building on the industrial side of the harbor, a place that smelled of salt, rust, and oil. The sign above the door read Johnson & Son Restoration. Inside was not the gleaming corporate office I associated with his family, but a vast, dusty workshop. It was filled with the skeletons of old boats, half-repaired engines, and the beautiful, chaotic clutter of a craftsman's sanctuary. "This was my father's," Ethan said, running a hand over the hull of a small wooden sailboat. "Before he and your grandfather turned the family business into a global shipping giant, he was a boat builder. He loved the work. The feel of the wood, the challenge of the engineering. He walked me through the workshop, his usual reserve falling away. He showed me the difference between a carvel and a clinker hull, the intricate knotwork he was an expert in, the half-finished sexton he was restoring on a workbench. This was his space, his real inheritance. It was a world away from the boardrooms and balance sheets. Caleb hated it here," he said, not with malice, but with a simple statement of fact. He thought it was dirty. He couldn't wait to get into an office, to make deals. My father, he always hoped one of us would carry this on. The art of it. He looked at me then, his gray eyes clear and direct. "I need you to understand this, Alara. The world you and I come from, the world of galas and alliances, that's Caleb's world. He thrives in it. I function in it. This," he gestured to the dusty, beautiful chaos around us, "is my world. It's quiet. It's methodical. It's not glamorous." He was showing me the truest part of himself, the part that existed far from his brother's shadow. He was offering me a glimpse into his soul, and asking if I could accept it, all of it. "When you were sick," he said suddenly, his voice dropping lower. "I came to the hospital a few times when no one else was there. You were so fragile. But you were fighting. And all I could think was that this fierce will to live was being wasted on a boy who wouldn't even recognize it. I saw you, Alara. Not as Caleb's admirer. As a person. And it made me sad to see you making yourself so small for him." Tears pricked my eyes. All these years, I had thought I was invisible to everyone but Caleb. But I had been wrong. The one person who had truly seen me, who had seen my pain and my strength, was the one person I had never bothered to look at. "Thank you," I whispered, the words feeling achingly inadequate. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "Just, don't go back to being small." That evening, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible, I returned home to find Caleb waiting for me. He was standing in the garden, by the old weeping willow, a place where we had shared a clumsy first kiss as teenagers. He had orchestrated the scene perfectly, right down to the lanterns he'd hung from the branches, mimicking a long-forgotten birthday party. "Alara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He held out a small, velvet box. "I was a fool. I see that now. I took you for granted. I was an idiot. But I do love you. I always have. Please, don't throw away everything we had for him. Marry me." He opened the box. Inside was a delicate diamond ring, far more ostentatious than the elegant sapphire and platinum band Ethan and I had chosen together. He was proposing, trying to overwrite my choice with a grand, cinematic gesture. I looked at his face, so earnest and desperate, and I felt nothing but a profound, weary sadness. His grand gesture wasn't about me. It was about him winning. It was about restoring the natural order of his universe. He didn't love me, he loved the idea of me loving him. "The girl you think you're proposing to doesn't exist anymore, Caleb," I said gently, not taking the box. "Maybe she never really did. You were never in love with me. You were in love with a mirror. And I'm tired of being a reflection." I looked at the ring, then back at his face. "You talk about everything we had. But we never had anything. I gave, and you took. That's not a relationship. It's a habit. And it's one I've finally broken." I left him there, standing under the mock-romantic lanterns, the velvet box still open in his hand. I didn't feel triumphant or angry. I just felt free. I walked back into the house, my steps light. I found my phone and sent a simple text to Ethan. "Your world is not glamorous. It's real. And I've never wanted anything more." His reply came almost instantly. Good. Because it's about to become our world. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that my choice had not been a strategy or an escape. It was a homecoming. The morning of my wedding day dawned crisp and clear. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of my bedroom, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. My dress, an elegant column of ivory silk, hung on the wardrobe door. It was simple, timeless, and utterly my own. There was a quiet hum of activity in the house, my mother fluttering, hairstylists whispering, but in my room, there was a strange and welcome peace. I wasn't the terrified, feverish girl from 4 years ago, nor was I the panicked bride so many of my friends had been. My heart was calm. The choice I had made in my grandfather's study, a choice born of instinct and desperation, had been reaffirmed 100 times over in the quiet moments since. It had been reaffirmed in a dusty workshop, in a shared glance across a crowded room, in the simple comfort of a text message. Just as the hairstylist was putting the final pin in my chignon, a small, discreet knock came at the door. It was Ethan's driver, holding a flat, rectangular box wrapped in simple brown paper. "From Mr. Johnson," he said. My mother fussed. "It's bad luck for the groom to send a gift on the day." I waved her concerns away and took the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, was not jewelry or some other extravagant trinket. It was a beautifully restored antique book. The leather was soft with age, the title embossed in faded gold, The Odyssey. Tucked inside the front cover was a simple, handwritten note. "Elara. They say every marriage is a journey. I know yours has already been a long one. Thank you for finally choosing a new direction. I can't promise a journey without storms, but I can promise you'll never have to navigate them alone. I'll be waiting at the end of the aisle. That's not a destination, but a starting line. Yours." Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the elegant script. He understood. He understood everything. He knew this wasn't just a wedding, it was the culmination of a profound, painful, and necessary transformation. He wasn't marrying the girl who had been Caleb's shadow. He was marrying the woman who had fought her way out of it. The ceremony was held in the old stone chapel on my family's estate. As I stood at the back, my grandfather on my arm, I saw him. Ethan was waiting at the altar, looking impossibly handsome in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit. His eyes found mine, and a slow, steady smile spread across his face. It was a smile just for me, full of warmth, reassurance, and a shared secret. My gaze flickered for a moment to the pews. Caleb was there, sitting next to his parents. He looked hollowed out, a ghost at the feast of his own making. He watched me walk down the aisle, and for the first time, I think he finally saw me, Elara, not his reflection. He saw the woman he had lost, not because she was stolen from him, but because he had never truly tried to know her. In his eyes, I saw not anger, but a dawning, painful understanding. It was the price of his arrogance, a lesson learned far too late. My grandfather placed my hand in Ethan's. His touch was warm and firm, a familiar anchor. As we turned to face the officiant, Ethan's thumb brushed gently over my knuckles. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. It said, "I'm here. We're in this together." We spoke the traditional vows, our voices clear and steady in the hallowed silence of the chapel. But as I looked into Ethan's deep, gray eyes, I knew our real vows were the unwritten ones. I vow to see you, not the space you occupy next to your brother. I vow to choose substance over style, depth over dazzle. I vow to never make myself small again. I vow to build something real on the solid ground we have found. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Ethan didn't crush me in a possessive embrace. He leaned in and kissed me with a tenderness that was both a promise and a welcome. It was not the fiery, demanding kiss I once dreamed of getting from Caleb. It was better. It was real. It was a kiss between equals. Later, at the reception, my grandfather cornered me by the gardens. He held a glass of champagne, a rare, genuine smile on his weathered face. "I must admit, Elara," he said, his voice low. "I did not see that coming. but it was the wisest decision you have ever made. You chose the man of character, not the man of charm. You made your own legacy today. He raised his glass to me. I'm proud of you. The weight of his approval was more gratifying than I could have imagined. As the evening wound down and the stars began to appear, Ethan and I slipped away from the noise and the crowd. We walked towards the edge of the lawn, the music fading behind us. He took off his suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders, warding off the evening chill. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, simply looking at the vast, star-dusted sky. There were no more games to be played, no more points to be proven. The past was a closed chapter, a story of a girl who had chased the sun and a boy who had stood unnoticed in the shadows. "Are you happy, Elara?" Ethan asked softly, his arm coming to rest around my waist. I leaned my head against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, clean, solid, real. I thought of the long, painful journey it had taken to get to this one peaceful moment. "I am," I said, my voice filled with a quiet, profound certainty. "I chose a husband in your grandfather's study. But I think I'm falling in love with you right here." He turned me to face him, his hands cupping my face. His gray eyes, so often guarded and serious, were shining with a light I now recognized as his own. It wasn't the blinding glare of the sun, but the steady, enduring light of a northern star. A light to build a life by. "Good," he whispered, before kissing me again. "Because I'm already there."